Before the review starts, I have to clear some things up. A review key was provided by the publisher, had to mention that. I usually do reviews in a way that my bias wouldn't cloud the judgment and without any expectations. However, no matter how objective analysis of the game is, the final score is always subjective. This is one of those reviews where my bias is gonna influence a lot more what I think of the game, because in my opinion this whole Diablo-esque genre sucks. It is one of the worst genres currently in gaming, as it is outdated, has crappy repetitive content and just plays on RNG and the dopamine slaves. There are things that I like in the genre, however, character build, progression, and I love isometric perspective. Only two modern games I would recommend to anyone from this whole genre with the same isometric perspective are The Ascent and Darksiders Genesis. Far better games than any Diablo-esque RNG loot-filled endless pointless grind. If you want to play loot-based games, why not just play Neo instead of Diablo? It has far better gameplay, one of the best combat systems ever, and same RNG itemization. Unless you have finished it already. Oh yeah, this is also a review from a single player perspective, as I have no intention to PvP or to play in groups. Which leads to the first major issue: constant online. Played on PlayStation 5 and servers are not great. Lag, disconnects, crashes, far from unplayable, but frequent enough to annoy. Eventually that is gonna be patched out, but why do we need constant online in a very single player oriented genre? Seems to me they desperately want to cater to MMO or live service audiences, especially how endgame content looks like. Now, some of you might say because of events. Not a good enough reason. Events can be scaled and put on a random timer very easily for offline play. Honestly, all the group stuff just annoyed me. I would love to test myself against world bosses on my own. Just scale HP and damage down a bit and it is sorted. People randomly joining events and participating leads to diarrhea of things happening on the screen where I just give up. Don't want to even participate because it doesn't matter what I do due to poor balancing. More players there are, the easier it gets, simple math. They could have easily implemented an offline option. Second thing I don't like is the shop. Game is fully priced and already missing classes such as Crusader that many would love to play. Now they have cosmetic stuff as microtransactions. Not really micro too. Some will say it is an online game even though it doesn't have to be, and they need constant income. What about profit from game sales and all the sales over time with, of course, paid DLC content? That isn't enough. There is support, and then there is exploiting players wherever they can. It is cosmetic only, some might say. Well, it is a RPG where character looks matter a lot. More skin variety adds to replayability and immersion. Not to everyone, but to a lot of us it does. Especially since armor cosmetics look insane, some of the best I've seen. Another thing is people acting like they wouldn't buy Blizzard game again due to a lot of shit that has happened with the studio recently, and yet Diablo 4 had one of the best launches ever. Not calling out anyone here on it, because we don't really discuss such games at length, but math doesn't add up when you think about it. Let's go into more positive stuff. Diablo 3 for me is a bad game that has almost no redeemable qualities except animations. Then again, even the absolute best in this genre is just mediocre to decent to me, because genre sucks. Didn't like the graphical style of Diablo 3 at all. Diablo 4 completely corrected that, and the game looks amazing with fantastic details, visual effects and animations. This graphical style is what I always want out of Diablo game. It adds that horror vibe and suits the dark world much better. Soundtrack is phenomenal too, reminiscent of older Diablos. Unfortunately, focus on MMO-like structure with repetitiveness as primary driving force takes away from the overall atmosphere. More story-driven experience with such great visual and audio presentation could have been something truly special. You can see it in the prologue. Blew me away how bloody atmospheric it was. I was so invested into everything that is going on thanks to that prologue. Enemies felt more significant, every character was interesting to me, locations look amazing with tons of details, which also leads to better immersion. Prologue story build-up could not be better. That feeling goes away quickly when you start figuring out how the game is constructed, as it doesn't reach such high ever again. Story is alright, nothing special but meaningful enough to keep you interested. Presentation is fantastic in terms of voice acting, visuals, CGI cutscenes and music. Bosses are really good too, as that is one of the main story discoveries to keep you interested. What next atrocity of a monster are they gonna come up with? When the story ends, game completely loses meaning for me. Now hear this shocking thing that should serve as a warning to everyone before investing an insane amount of time into Diablo 4. First real challenge was when doing the Fallen Temple capstone dungeon to unlock the Torment World tier. I died about 10 times on the boss that was 5 levels higher because I couldn't grind anymore due to how dull the game had become. You know how much it took me to get to that point? Over 100 hours. Granted, I did do a lot of side quests and was paying attention for a long time to writing and story because that is what interested me. There is definitely a way to speed things up though, but it could lead to even duller experience in that case, as nothing really stands out content-wise outside of story. Except world bosses that are nicely done. Diablo 4 is gonna exhaust probably the vast majority of players. Grind from Nightmare to Torment tier is insane due to snail-pace leveling. Terrible design decision. So upon reaching Torment I was 8 levels below monsters in dungeons and most events. This is when the game finally became interesting to play after ending the story, because every progression system in place had to be utilized to get further. Unfortunately, I was exhausted at that point and could care less about progressing anymore. They made almost the same mistake as with Diablo 3 in terms of challenging content, way too easy for too long. World tiers are not a bad idea at all, but it is terribly implemented and way off balance. It is a shame, cause classes I've tried and seen are really interesting and well done, so I would love to see what they could do at a higher level, but there is no way in hell I am grinding again. Mained Necromancer and played with Druid a bit. Also played in co-op a bit with my girl who never held the gamepad before and still managed to succeed quickly. She played Barbarian, so I've seen a glimpse of potential in that class too. Honestly, every class interests me. I usually don't like mage characters in RPGs, but in Diablo they look incredibly appealing to play. Love the Necro and Druid. The way Druid shapeshifts while performing skills is an amazing idea that does a lot to immerse yourself into a character. Skills I've seen are mostly really well done and can lead to interesting gameplay by coming up with various combo rotation ideas. From what I've seen so far, it seems that every class is gonna have 2 to 4 subclass varieties. How balanced it is hard to say. In comments feel free to add your take on it, as I'm interested to hear what you think about overall class and subclass balancing. Classes overall are a big positive. Major gameplay improvement comes from class skills that are constructed around more active gameplay. Diablo 4 emphasizes more active gameplay to require precise movement and positioning. It is definitely one of the best I've experienced in terms of dynamic gameplay in this sucky genre where gameplay is usually dull and too static. This was always one of the major gripes I had with almost every loot-based Diablo-esque game. In Diablo 4 it is one of the reasons that kept me going despite the lack of any meaningful challenge. Upon reaching Torment, gameplay became far more interesting as I had to really time stuff like rotation, movement and even running from enemies from time to time. To be fair, I was 8 levels lower than my enemies, which kept it interesting, but also death came too easily. It is still your typical Diablo-esque gameplay, but just better. Goal being to get as many enemies as possible around you to blow them up as soon as possible. Nevertheless, gameplay surprised me because I expected the same dullness as with most other similar games, but in the end I have to give it to them. They did a good job. Enemy design is quite good too, especially aesthetically. There is a good amount of enemy variety in the game, with each doing their own thing. Special attacks can change direction of a fight or tactic applied. For example, aura enemies appear that can protect allies by significantly reducing damage received. Enemies that project the aura do not have the damage reduction, so you have to target specific enemies at times to get things over faster. Elite enemies and bosses have skills that mostly require the player to change positions in order to avoid getting stunned, heavily damaged, slowed, poisoned or whatnot. There is enough variety of attacks to keep things interesting. Also focus on crowd controlling the player, so builds need to have sort of getaway skill next to available away. Good ideas, but upon reaching the last world tier it all tends to be too much, meaning too much stuff on the screen when lots of enemies are present. When coming towards the end, enemies start to have random bonuses assigned that don't have any sense through lore. For example, any elite or champion enemy can become the same powerful lightning enemy, and it doesn't matter if it is a vampire, human, zombie or whatever. Game has specific race dungeons but adds these nonsensical modifiers instead of introducing more enemy variety through hard difficulties but with abilities that have some connection to the actual race and lore. Bosses are well designed as they tend to go through phases where things crank up as phases progress. Aesthetically they are amazing for the most part. Story bosses are uniquely great and loved almost every encounter. Dungeon ones are alright but they seem to be too disbalanced. It could also depend on which class and build faces each boss, so hard to say if this balance is an actual problem or not. World bosses seems to be bigger versions of dungeon ones with more attacks in the arsenal, and they are probably the most enjoyable content in the game. If the game was story driven with much better thought out difficulty tiers, then it would lead to continuously good experience, as the story bosses would be a hard challenge that would require doing side things and thinking about builds to actually progress. Meaning utilizing all the mechanics the game has to offer in order to conquer it. Unfortunately, most story bosses are just there to be seen and destroyed. One or two were maybe challenging, but that is it. Now let's talk about content. As I said earlier, the game lost every meaning to continue playing due to how repetitive and boring the endgame is. While going through story and regional side quests, it adds a bit of lore that can connect players with the actual purpose. Most side quests do not have any significant writing behind them, but there are more than a few that have really interesting stories, like with Witch Girl and her sick mother, where interesting questions are raised. Bunch of events, dungeons, Helltide and whatnot kill any will to do side quests. Problem with Diablo 4 endgame content is not that there isn't variety, even though it leaves a lot to be desired. Problem is that so much grind requires variety up the wazoo to make the game interesting enough to play with such slow grind. Unfortunately, bosses, which are most interesting content, repeat themselves a lot in dungeons. Event variety is nowhere near enough and they are way too unbalanced. World bosses spawn way too sporadically. Helltides have similar boss repetition issues. Nightmare dungeons are just like dungeons with few modifiers that don't make them specifically interesting. Endgame is way too slow. Getting from Nightmare to Torment is literally that, Nightmare and Torment, but not in a good way. Nothing changes that much in the last world tier except ancestral items instead of sacred, which means nothing else but a better version of a normal item, nothing unique. So what is the point of even spending so much time to get to Torment? I genuinely don't know, cause for me it isn't worth it. Campaign was worth it because it introduced new areas, characters, enemies and genuinely interested me. Rest is insane dull repetition that even much better gameplay can't save. Strongholds are exceptions. They are well done, unique and have interesting mechanics with unique bosses, much better than any dungeon, event or whatnot. This is the type of content they should have gone more with. Haven't cleared all the strongholds, so don't know if they repeat themselves, but so far every single one was uniquely crafted in terms of a challenge it possesses. Whole concept of making the game more like an MMO kills the world and its significance almost completely. It's a shame, because details are amazing, which makes every location fantastic. Whispers in the endgame force you to complete basic MMO type quests in the world for weak rewards, but other than that you won't spend almost any time battling stuff. Nightmare dungeons are far more rewarding, and the only thing I was doing in the overworld are Helltides, which are not bad but are not great either. And the world boss once in I don't know how many days. Think I've done 3 world bosses in 125 hours. Great stuff, Blizzard. Now we go to character progression. As I said already, I think class abilities are well done as they incentivize more active gameplay. Another big part of the game is itemization. First, let me shit all over the inventory management. Every 10 to 20 minutes or so I have to get back to town to dismantle, extract aspects, sell stuff and so on. Jesus Christ, what a pain that is. Oh, but it is a tradition to have crap inventory management. Smallpox were also a traditional disease. Want that back too? Or maybe the plague? What a fucking waste of time. Item system in the game is a double-bladed sword. On the one hand, I love that items can change abilities, which deepens the progression system. On the other hand, I hate the fact that they have random modifiers on them. What I mean is every effect has a fixed value it can reach. For example, damage effect can be from 5 to 10%, and in numbers game that this game is, it is one of those fun things you'll be chasing. And chase you shall. For a long time. In order for the game to be even grindier, they have given the opportunity to players to switch one effect from any item. That effect can be changed an unlimited amount of time, but they have given only 2 options per change. Second time to change that same effect costs 500,000 gold. What the fuck? Even in Neo, one of the grindiest games ever, they have said to themselves, bloody hell, this is stupid. Let's give them a full list of effects to choose from. Aspect system is great, but the effect or fix system is terrible, as it adds to repetition and dullness of the whole game. Then you start switching from Sacred to Ancestral and figure out quickly that nothing has changed except the affix values, so for the next 20 levels or so you'll be doing the same pointless thing. I like the fact that they have made dungeons more rewarding to play by having aspects as permanent reward, but the issue is that dungeon aspects are the worst version of an aspect you can get. Considering they love repetition, why not make tiered dungeons with tiered aspects as a reward? For example, complete Ancestral Dungeon and unlock Ancestral level aspect that would substitute the one unlocked in lower world tiers. Game could use a couple more quality of life options like UI scale, option to remove or change how co-op circles beneath characters appear, auto loot options and some more. Those can be easily added though. Time for final verdict. Considering that this whole loot focused genre sucks and that a potential masterpiece inside the genre, which this isn't, would be a 7 out of 10 game for me at best, I'm going with 5 out of 10 for Diablo 4 on PlayStation 5 with potential at 6. That means average or mediocre score. Game has improved gameplay, good bosses, decent story and characters for this genre, fantastic presentation, great classes, but the content is not good enough and progression is way too slow and unrewarding after the campaign. They took the easy way out with the repetition instead of making something truly special by approaching it in a different way so that the story is the driving factor and that we need to really work on a character to be able to beat the bosses to progress the story. If you plan on playing the game in co-op or in groups, then I'm sure you're gonna find it much more appealing. For solo players it becomes too dull too quickly. Anyway, that is it, thanks for watching.